Hey guys, tonight we begin with something deliciously dark and wonderfully weird. The secret world of medieval love potions, where desperate hearts met dangerous chemistry, and romance was quite literally a matter of life and death. We're diving deep into the bizarre concoctions that medieval alchemists brewed in the name of love. Potions so strange they make modern dating apps look perfectly reasonable. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Picture this: it's 1347, and you're a lovesick merchant in Florence, staring hopelessly at the baker's daughter who won't even glance your way. What do? Well, if you're like most people in medieval Europe, you don't write poetry or bring flowers. No. You visit the local alchemist, slip him a few coins, and walk away with a vial of something that smells suspiciously like rotten eggs mixed with desperation. Because in the medieval world, love wasn't just an emotion. It was a chemical equation waiting to be solved. Medieval alchemists weren't just trying to turn lead into gold. They were running the world's first pharmaceutical romance industry, brewing up potions that promised to make anyone fall desperately, madly, irrevocably in love with you. These weren't your garden variety herbal teas either. We're talking about concoctions that included everything from crushed pearls to powdered unicorn horn, from the blood of freshly sacrificed doves to the ground-up bones of saints. Yes, saints. Because apparently, even holy relics weren't safe from medieval Cupid's arrows. But here's where it gets really interesting. These love potions weren't just random mixtures thrown together by village-wise women. They were carefully crafted formulas passed down through generations of alchemists who treated romance like a science. Each ingredient had a purpose, a meaning, a supposed magical property that would unlock the secrets of the human heart. They had elaborate theories about how attraction worked, complex charts showing which herbs corresponded to which emotions, and detailed instructions that read like recipes for disaster. Take, for example, the infamous elixir of eternal devotion, a potion so powerful that it supposedly made the drinker fall in love with the first person they saw after consuming it. The recipe called for 13 different ingredients, each one more bizarre than the last. Spider silk gathered at midnight, the tears of a virgin who had been rejected in love, ground emeralds worth more than most people's houses, and something called aqua vitae, which was basically medieval moonshine strong enough to strip paint. But the real kicker? The potion had to be prepared during a full moon while chanting specific incantations in Latin and stirred exactly 666 times with a silver spoon that had never touched human lips. The whole process took 3 days and nights, during which the alchemist couldn't sleep, eat, or speak to another human being. And at the end of all that effort, you'd have about 2 tablespoons of liquid that looked like muddy water and smelled like a swamp. The strangest part wasn't even the ingredients themselves. It was how seriously everyone took them. Medieval people genuinely believed that the right combination of substances could override free will itself, that you could literally force someone to love you by slipping the right powder into their wine. Kings consulted alchemists about love potions. Nobles spent fortunes on romantic elixirs. Even the church, which officially condemned such practices, quietly turned a blind eye when it came to matters of the heart, and the demand was absolutely insane. In major cities like Paris, London, and Rome, there were entire districts dedicated to love magic. Alchemists advertised their services with cryptic symbols painted on their doors. A heart pierced by an arrow meant love potions. A pair of intertwined snakes suggested more intimate enhancements. A crescent moon indicated they specialized in potions that worked under cover of darkness. These weren't back alley operations either. Some of the most respected scholars of the age were secretly brewing love potions on the side. University professors who spent their days lecturing on philosophy would spend their nights grinding up exotic ingredients for desperate romantics. Monastery libraries contained hidden manuscripts with detailed recipes for amorous elixirs, carefully disguised as medical treatises or theological discussions. But perhaps the most fascinating thing about medieval love potions was how incredibly specific they were. This wasn't one-size-fits-all magic. Different potions were designed for different situations. There were elixirs to make someone fall in love with you from scratch. There were others designed to rekindle fading romance in long marriages. Some potions were meant to make your beloved more passionate, while others promised to make them more faithful. There were even revenge potions, designed to make your romantic rival fall hopelessly in love with someone completely inappropriate. The potion of burning desire, for instance, was specifically crafted for women who wanted to seduce men of higher social standing. The recipe included rose petals soaked in the blood of a white dove, ground pearls dissolved in virgin's tears, and something rather ominously called the essence of midnight longing. The woman would wear this mixture as a perfume, and supposedly any man who caught her scent would be consumed with uncontrollable passion for her. Then there was the elixir of faithful hearts, designed for suspicious spouses who wanted to ensure their partner's loyalty. This particularly nasty brew contained herbs that were supposed to make the drinker physically ill if they even thought about being unfaithful. The ingredients included bitter wormwood, crushed beetles, and a plant called devil's claw that grew only in graveyards. Not exactly the foundation for a healthy relationship, but medieval people weren't particularly concerned with modern relationship psychology. The complexity of these formulas was truly staggering. A single love potion might require ingredients from 3 different continents, preparation techniques that took weeks to complete, and timing so precise that many alchemists kept detailed astronomical charts to know exactly when to begin brewing. Some recipes demanded that specific words be spoken over the mixture at predetermined intervals. Others required the potion to be prepared by someone who had never been in love themselves, which must have made finding qualified alchemists rather challenging. And the prices? Absolutely astronomical. A single vial of premium love potion could cost more than a skilled craftsman earned in a year. The most exotic ingredients were worth their weight in gold, literally. Unicorn horn, which was actually narwhal tusk, could bankrupt entire families. Dragon's blood, which came from a tree resin, was so valuable that merchants would risk their lives traveling to remote islands to collect it. Ground ruby was considered essential for the most powerful potions, meaning that only the wealthiest nobles could afford the really good stuff. But here's where things get really dark. Medieval alchemists weren't just dealing with harmless herbs and pretty gemstones. Many of their love potions contained genuinely dangerous substances. Mercury, which they called quicksilver, was believed to make emotions more fluid and changeable. Lead was thought to make affections more permanent and lasting. Various deadly nightshade derivatives were used to dilate pupils, creating the wide-eyed look of someone smitten with love. The line between love potion and poison was often disturbingly thin. Some alchemists specialized in what they euphemistically called strong persuasion potions. These weren't designed to create genuine love, but rather to make the target more compliant and suggestible. The ingredients often included substances we now know are hallucinogenic or mind-altering. Medieval people didn't understand the difference between chemical attraction and genuine emotional connection, so they saw nothing wrong with essentially drugging someone into compliance. The church's official position on love potions was complex and contradictory. Technically, they were forbidden as a form of witchcraft and demonic influence. The use of supernatural means to manipulate another person's will was considered a serious sin, potentially punishable by excommunication or even death. Priests regularly preached against the dangers of love magic, warning that such practices invited demonic possession and eternal damnation. Yet at the same time, many members of the clergy were secretly customers themselves. Cardinals commissioned love potions to win the favor of influential nobles. Bishops consulted alchemists about potions that might help them resist temptation or perhaps embrace it more fully. Even Pope Benedict XVIII was rumored to have used love magic in his numerous romantic scandals, though the church has always denied these allegations. This created a thriving black market in ecclesiastical love potions, specialized elixirs designed for members of the clergy. These had to be particularly subtle, since a priest suddenly acting lovesick would raise uncomfortable questions. The formulas focused on ingredients that would create gentle attraction rather than obvious infatuation. Holy water, blessed under specific conditions, communion wine aged in sacred vessels, and incense mixed with carefully selected herbs that would create an aura of spiritual attraction. The most sought-after love potions were those that promised to work without the target's knowledge. The invisible Cupid's arrow was one such formula, designed to be completely tasteless and odorless when mixed into food or drink. The recipe was closely guarded, passed down only through master-apprentice relationships, and required ingredients so rare that some alchemists spent their entire careers trying to acquire them all. Medieval literature is absolutely packed with references to love potions, suggesting just how deeply embedded they were in the popular imagination. From the tragic romance of Tristan and Isolde, whose love was sparked by accidentally drinking a potion meant for someone else, to countless folk tales of wise women brewing elixirs for desperate lovers. These magical concoctions were woven into the very fabric of medieval storytelling. But the stories weren't always romantic. Medieval chronicles are full of darker tales, accounts of love potions gone wrong, of obsession turning to madness, of political marriages destroyed by magical interference. There are records of nobles being poisoned by rivals who slipped deadly substances into what appeared to be harmless love elixirs. The line between romance and murder was often razor thin in the medieval world. The preparation of love potions was considered both an art and a science. Master alchemists spent decades learning not just which ingredients to use, but how to combine them, when to add each component, and what words of power to speak during the brewing process. They had to understand astrology, since many potions were believed to work only when prepared under specific planetary alignments. They needed knowledge of human anatomy, since different potions were designed to affect different parts of the body and mind, and they required a deep understanding of what we might now call psychology, since the most effective love potions were those tailored to the specific personality and desires of both the user and the target. The workshops where these potions were created were like something out of a fairy tale, but much more dangerous. Shelves lined with hundreds of glass vials containing everything from exotic spices to preserved animal parts. Tables covered with grinding stones, measuring scales, and burning braziers that filled the air with intoxicating smoke. Books bound in leather and written in multiple languages, their pages filled with cryptic formulas and arcane symbols. And always the smell of something cooking, bubbling, fermenting in the background. Young apprentices would spend years learning just to identify the various ingredients correctly. A mistake in measurement could turn a love potion into a poison. The wrong timing could render months of work completely useless, and the secrecy was absolute. Alchemists who revealed their formulas to outsiders might find themselves the target of both legal persecution and professional sabotage. The competition was fierce, and the stakes were literally life and death. As we settle deeper into this strange world of medieval romance and chemistry, remember that we're just getting started. The recipes we've touched on so far are merely the beginning. Ahead of us lie even more bizarre concoctions, stranger ingredients, and stories that will make you question everything you thought you knew about love in the Middle Ages. The medieval alchemists weren't just mixing herbs and hoping for the best. They were conducting elaborate experiments in human emotion, using techniques and ingredients that were as dangerous as they were exotic. The medieval mind understood love as a physical phenomenon, something that could be measured, manipulated, and manufactured. They believed passion literally heated the blood, that attraction was caused by invisible vapors rising from certain substances, and that the heart could be trained like a hunting dog to follow specific scents. This wasn't metaphorical thinking. To them, love was as real and tangible as fever or hunger, which meant it could be treated with the right medicine. This led to some truly extraordinary theories about how romantic attraction actually worked. Medieval alchemists developed elaborate charts showing which bodily humors controlled different types of love. Yellow bile was responsible for passionate, consuming attraction. Black bile created deep, melancholy longing. Blood produced warm, steady affection. And phlegm, surprisingly, was linked to the kind of obsessive love that lasted decades. Understanding these humors was crucial because the most effective love potions were designed to rebalance them in specific ways. The elixir of melancholy hearts was perhaps the most sophisticated example of this approach. Rather than simply making someone fall in love, it was designed to create a very specific type of romantic obsession. The drinker would become consumed with thoughts of unrequited love, spending hours composing poetry, staring longingly out of windows, and sighing dramatically at inappropriate moments. The formula included ingredients specifically chosen to increase black bile production: crushed obsidian to darken the thoughts, raven's feathers gathered during a thunderstorm, and something called tears of Saturn, which was actually a mineral solution that tasted like liquid despair. But the real genius was in the timing. The potion had to be administered during what alchemists called the hour of longing, that melancholy period just after sunset, when shadows grew long and people naturally felt more contemplative. The victim would drink the elixir, usually mixed into wine or ale, and within hours would be overcome with a profound sense of romantic yearning. They wouldn't necessarily fall in love with any specific person, but they'd become desperately eager to find someone, anyone, to fill the sudden aching void in their heart. This made them perfect targets for the potion's creator, who would then appear as if by coincidence, offering comfort and companionship to someone clearly suffering from the pangs of love. It was manipulation of the most sophisticated kind, using chemistry to create an emotional need, then positioning oneself as the solution to that need. Medieval courtship could be absolutely ruthless when money and power were involved. The ingredients themselves tell a fascinating story about medieval trade networks and cultural beliefs. Saffron, worth more than gold, was imported from distant Persian gardens and believed to make the heart more receptive to joy. Cinnamon bark, carried by merchants across thousands of miles of dangerous territory, was thought to warm the blood and increase desire. Frankincense, burned in churches across Europe, was secretly diverted to love potion workshops, where it was ground into powder and mixed with wine to create what alchemists called the breath of angels. Some of the most expensive potions included ingredients that came from legendary sources: phoenix feathers, which were actually rare peacock plumes treated with special dyes and oils; mermaid scales, usually fish scales that had been blessed by priests and soaked in holy water; dragon's tears, which were actually crystallized tree sap from exotic locations but sold for astronomical prices to desperate romantics who believed they were purchasing genuine mythological materials. The preparation rituals were often more elaborate than the potions themselves. The Workshop of Eternal Flames was a love potion that required the alchemist to maintain a continuous fire for 13 days and nights, never allowing the flame to die or flicker. Each day, at precisely noon, a new ingredient had to be added while reciting specific incantations in ancient Greek. The alchemist couldn't sleep, couldn't eat anything but bread and water, and couldn't speak to another human being during the entire process. On the 13th day, as the sun reached its highest point, the final ingredient would be added. This was always something personal to the intended target: a lock of their hair, a piece of clothing they'd worn, or earth from a place where they'd walked. The belief was that this created a mystical connection between the potion and its intended victim, ensuring that the magic would work only on them and no one else. The Workshop of Eternal Flames supposedly created such powerful attraction that the target would be drawn to the potion's creator, like iron to a lodestone. They wouldn't be able to explain their sudden fascination, wouldn't understand why they felt compelled to seek out someone they'd previously ignored, but they'd be powerless to resist. The effect was said to last exactly 1 year, after which the attraction would fade gradually unless renewed with a fresh dose. But not all love potions were designed to create attraction. Some of the most disturbing formulas were revenge potions, created by rejected lovers who wanted to punish those who had spurned them. The curse of unrequited longing was one such brew, designed to make the target fall hopelessly in love with someone who would never return their affection. The victim would become obsessed with pursuing someone completely out of their reach, a member of the nobility if they were a peasant, someone already married, or even someone who had taken religious vows. The psychological torture was exquisite. The target would spend every waking moment thinking about their impossible love, writing letters that would never be answered, composing songs that would never be heard, and slowly driving themselves mad with desire that could never be fulfilled. Meanwhile, the person who had commissioned the potion would watch their former pursuer suffer the same kind of rejection they themselves had experienced. Medieval justice could be absolutely poetic in its cruelty. These revenge potions often included ingredients specifically chosen for their associations with suffering and futility. Dried tears from professional mourners, collected during funerals and preserved in crystal vials, thorns from roses that had been left to wither and die, symbolizing love that was doomed from the start, ashes from love letters that had been burned unread, representing communication that would never reach its intended recipient. The most sophisticated revenge potions were those that created love triangles. The elixir of divided hearts was designed to make the target fall in love with two different people simultaneously, creating an impossible situation where any choice would lead to heartbreak. The formula required ingredients gathered from two different sources, representing the two sides of the romantic conflict. Honey from bees that had never known winter, mixed with salt from tears shed during the coldest months of the year. Pressed from olives grown in sunlight, combined with extract from mushrooms that grew only in darkness. Medieval alchemists understood that the most effective torture wasn't physical pain, but emotional confusion. Someone torn between two equally powerful loves would be paralyzed by indecision, unable to commit fully to either relationship, ultimately losing both through their inability to choose. The psychological insight was remarkably sophisticated for its time, suggesting that medieval people understood human nature far better than we sometimes give them credit for. The gender dynamics of love potion use were particularly fascinating. While both men and women commissioned these elixirs, they tended to request different types of effects. Men typically wanted potions that would make women more physically attracted to them, more willing to engage in intimate relationships, more compliant in general. Their requests often focused on immediate, obvious results that would boost their ego and social status. Women, on the other hand, usually asked for more subtle and long-lasting effects. They wanted potions that would make men more emotionally attached, more likely to remain faithful, more willing to provide financial security and social protection. Female customers understood that their survival often depended on male approval and support, so their magical requests reflected these practical concerns rather than simple romantic fantasy. This led to the development of entirely different categories of love potions. The elixir of binding promises was designed specifically for women who wanted to ensure their lovers would marry them rather than simply pursue physical relationships. The formula included ingredients associated with permanence and commitment. Iron filings from a wedding ring that had been blessed by a priest, representing the strength of marital bonds. Stones from the foundation of a church, symbolizing religious sanctification of the relationship. Hair from a couple who had been married for more than 50 years, embodying the hope for lasting love. But perhaps the most requested type was the potion of forgotten others, designed to make a married man forget about his wife and focus entirely on his mistress. This was incredibly dangerous territory, both legally and spiritually, since adultery was a serious crime, and destroying a marriage was considered a grave sin. Yet the demand was enormous, particularly among noble women who had become involved with married men and wanted to secure their position. These potions often included ingredients specifically chosen to cloud memory and judgment. Poppy seeds soaked in wine until they released their sleep-inducing properties, then dried and ground into powder. Mushrooms that grew in fairy rings, believed to have the power to confuse human thoughts and make people forget their responsibilities. Water collected from 7 different streams during the new moon, representing the washing away of old commitments and the beginning of new loyalties. The preparation required extraordinary secrecy, since discovery could result in charges of adultery, witchcraft, and conspiracy to destroy a Christian marriage. Female alchemists often specialized in these formulas, working through networks of servants, seamstresses, and other women who had access to noble households. The potions would be slipped into food or drink during elaborate dinner parties, hidden in perfumes and cosmetics, or even sewn into clothing where they would slowly release their effects through contact with skin. Medieval record keeping was surprisingly detailed when it came to documenting the effects of these potions, though the records were usually kept secret and hidden away in private libraries. Alchemists maintained careful notes about which formulas worked, which failed, and which produced unexpected side effects. These experimental logs read like primitive scientific journals, filled with observations about dosage, timing, and individual variations in response. One particularly detailed account describes a nobleman who commissioned a love potion to win the affections of a merchant's daughter. The formula included crushed emeralds, dissolved pearls, and extract from flowers that bloomed only during leap years. According to the alchemist's notes, the potion was administered successfully. The young woman did indeed fall in love with the nobleman, and they were married within 6 months. However, the effect proved too powerful. The woman became so obsessed with her husband that she refused to let him leave the house, grew violently jealous of any other woman he spoke to, and eventually had to be confined to prevent her from attacking perceived rivals. This kind of detailed documentation suggests that medieval alchemists were genuinely trying to understand and improve their craft, not simply taking money from desperate people and hoping for the best. They were conducting what we might recognize as primitive pharmaceutical research, testing different combinations of ingredients, adjusting dosages based on the size and temperament of the intended target, and carefully observing the results to refine their techniques. The side effects were often as dramatic as the intended effects. Love potions that were supposed to create gentle attraction sometimes produced violent obsession. Elixirs designed to rekindle fading romance occasionally resulted in uncontrollable jealousy. Formulas intended to make someone more faithful sometimes made them so possessive that they drove away the very person they were trying to keep. Medieval alchemists developed an entire pharmacology of romantic side effects. Excessive sweating was considered a sign that a love potion was working too strongly and needed to be counteracted with cooling herbs. Insomnia indicated that the target's thoughts were too focused on their new love interest and required a mild sedative to restore balance. Loss of appetite was seen as evidence that physical desire was overwhelming all other needs and had to be moderated with digestive tonics. The most feared side effect was what alchemists called the madness of Cupid, a condition where love potions created such intense obsession that the victim lost touch with reality entirely. They would spend days writing the same love letter over and over, carve their beloved's name into every available surface, and sometimes become violent toward anyone they perceived as standing between them and the object of their affection. Medieval asylums housed numerous patients whose families claimed they had been driven insane by love magic. This led to the development of antidotes, counter potions designed to neutralize the effects of love elixirs that had gone wrong. The universal remedy for excessive affection was one such formula, containing ingredients specifically chosen to cool passionate emotions and restore rational thinking. Bitter herbs that were supposed to make romantic thoughts unpleasant, stones that had been blessed by celibate monks, and water from springs that had never reflected the moon, symbolizing love that had never had a chance to develop. But antidotes were almost as dangerous as the original potions. Someone whose artificial love was suddenly removed might become suicidal, realizing that their recent happiness had been chemically induced rather than genuine. The psychological shock of understanding that their deepest emotions had been manipulated could be devastating. Medieval physicians reported cases of people who had been given love potion antidotes and subsequently refused to trust their own feelings ever again, spending the rest of their lives wondering whether any emotion they experienced was real or chemically induced. As winter nights grew longer and castle fires burned lower, the demand for love potions reached its peak. The long, dark months when people were confined indoors together created both opportunity and desperation. Noble ladies trapped in arranged marriages dreamed of passionate romance. Young men isolated in monasteries yearned for feminine companionship they could never legitimately pursue. And in the shadows between candlelight and darkness, alchemists worked their strange magic, brewing potions that promised to transform the human heart itself. But the most bizarre formulas were yet to come, recipes so strange and dangerous that even experienced alchemists approached them with trembling hands and whispered prayers. The winter solstice brought with it the most dangerous time for love magic, when alchemists claimed the veil between the physical and spiritual worlds grew thin enough for their most potent elixirs to take hold. It was during these longest nights that the truly bizarre formulas emerged from hidden workshops, recipes so strange they seemed more like fever dreams than serious chemistry. The Midnight Transformation was perhaps the most notorious of these solstice potions. According to the few surviving accounts, this elixir didn't simply make someone fall in love. It supposedly allowed the drinker to temporarily inhabit the body of their beloved, experiencing attraction from the other person's perspective. The recipe required ingredients gathered exclusively during the darkest hours of winter nights. Snow that had fallen during a thunderstorm, which was considered impossibly rare and powerfully magical. The final breath of a dying swan, captured in a crystal vial at the exact moment of death. And most disturbing of all, a mirror that had reflected the face of someone who had died of a broken heart. The preparation ritual was equally macabre. The alchemist had to work in complete darkness, feeling their way through the formula by touch alone, never allowing any light to fall upon the mixture. They wore gloves made from the skin of animals that mated for life, usually swans or wolves, and spoke only in whispers throughout the entire process. The brewing took place inside a circle drawn with chalk made from ground bones, and the final product had to be consumed within moments of completion, before the rising sun could contaminate its power. Those who drank the midnight transformation reported experiences that sound more like possession than romance. They claimed to suddenly understand exactly what their beloved found attractive or repulsive, to feel desire from the opposite perspective, to know instinctively what words or gestures would kindle passion in their target's heart. But the effect came at a terrible cost. Many users reported feeling permanently disconnected from their own emotions afterward, as if they had borrowed someone else's feelings so completely that they could never quite find their way back to their authentic selves. Even more disturbing was the elixir of stolen dreams, a potion that supposedly allowed the user to enter their beloved's dreams and plant romantic visions there. Night after night, the target would experience incredibly vivid dreams of passionate romance with the potion's creator, dreams so realistic and emotionally intense that they began to confuse dream love with waking attraction. The victim would wake each morning with increasingly strong feelings for someone they barely knew in real life, unable to explain their sudden fascination, but powerless to resist it. The ingredients for dream invasion potions were harvested exclusively from sleeping sources. Tears collected from people who cried in their sleep, usually gathered by servants who crept into bedrooms with tiny silver spoons. Breath captured from lovers who whispered each other's names while dreaming, preserved in bottles sealed with wax from candles that had burned in bedrooms where people had died. Flower petals that had been placed under the pillows of newlyweds on their wedding night, absorbing the essence of romantic dreams and fresh desire. The most skilled dream workers could craft incredibly specific visions. A merchant might commission dreams where his beloved saw herself as a noble lady married to a wealthy husband. A servant could purchase dreams where she appeared as an equal to the lord who employed her, dancing with him at grand balls and receiving his passionate declarations of love. These weren't random romantic fantasies, but carefully crafted psychological campaigns designed to reshape the target's desires and expectations. But dream manipulation came with its own unique dangers. People who had their dreams invaded often developed chronic insomnia, subconsciously afraid to sleep because they sensed their minds were being violated. Others became addicted to their artificial dream romances, spending longer and longer periods asleep, neglecting food and water as they chased increasingly elaborate fantasy relationships. Medieval physicians documented cases of people who literally died from dreaming too much, their bodies wasting away while their minds lived in imaginary worlds of perfect love. The church was particularly horrified by dream invasion potions because they seemed to violate the sanctity of the soul itself. Dreams were considered a direct communication channel between humans and the divine, the place where God sent visions and angels delivered messages. To corrupt this sacred space with artificial romantic fantasies was seen as a form of spiritual rape, a violation so profound it threatened the victim's eternal salvation as well as their earthly happiness. This led to the development of what the church called protective dream formulas, counter potions designed to shield the mind from magical invasion during sleep. These were officially sanctioned by religious authorities and sold openly in monastery shops, though they were essentially the same kind of herbal chemistry that the church condemned when used for offensive purposes. The hypocrisy was breathtaking, but medieval people were remarkably good at compartmentalizing moral contradictions when it served their needs. The most expensive love potions were those that promised to work across vast distances, allowing someone to influence a beloved who lived in another city or even another country. The formula of yearning winds was designed to carry romantic attraction through the air itself, using birds as unwitting messengers to deliver chemical love across hundreds of miles. The alchemist would feed specially treated grain to carrier pigeons, who would then be released to fly toward the target's location. As the birds traveled, they would supposedly spread invisible particles of the love potion through the air, creating a trail of romantic influence that would gradually reach the intended victim. The grain treatment was incredibly complex, involving herbs that had been blessed by priests from 7 different churches, ground pearls mixed with honey that had never been exposed to sunlight, and oils extracted from flowers that grew only on mountain tops. Each pigeon had to be fed exactly 13 grains of the treated mixture, no more and no less, and released at dawn while speaking the target's name aloud 7 times. The birds would fly their normal migration routes, but their breath and droppings would carry the magical essence across vast territories. Whether through coincidence or genuine magical influence, these long-distance love potions did seem to work occasionally. Medieval correspondence includes numerous accounts of people suddenly developing inexplicable romantic obsessions with individuals they had never met, often describing dreams and visions that matched exactly with the descriptions provided by distant admirers who had commissioned wind-carried love magic. But perhaps the most bizarre category of medieval love potions were those designed to work retroactively, changing the past rather than influencing the future. The elixir of revised history claimed to alter the target's memories of their relationship with the potion's creator, making them remember romantic encounters that had never actually happened. Someone who had been consistently rejected could supposedly make their beloved remember passionate nights together, tender declarations of love, and promises of marriage that existed only in the fantasy world created by the potion. The ingredients for memory-altering potions had to be gathered from sources associated with forgotten or lost things. Dust from books that had never been read, symbolizing knowledge that had never entered human consciousness. Water from wells that had been abandoned and forgotten, representing memories that had been left behind. Stones from ruins where no one could remember what had originally stood there, embodying the malleability of human recollection. The preparation required the alchemist to work while in a state of deliberate confusion, often achieved by spinning in circles for hours before beginning the brewing process, or by consuming mild hallucinogens that made it difficult to distinguish between reality and imagination. The theory was that the potion had to be created by someone who was themselves uncertain about what was real and what was fantasy, allowing the mixture to exist in the liminal space between truth and fiction. Users of memory revision potions reported mixed results. Some claimed their targets did indeed begin remembering romantic encounters that had never occurred, greeting them with warmth and familiarity that seemed to come from shared experiences that existed only in the artificial memories. But others found that the false memories were too obviously fabricated, creating confusion and suspicion rather than attraction. Worst of all, some users discovered that the potion worked too well, creating false memories in their own minds as well, until they could no longer distinguish between their real romantic history and the fictional version they had tried to implant in someone else. The most feared side effect of retroactive love potions was something alchemists called memory plague, a condition where false romantic memories began spreading from person to person like a contagious disease. Someone whose memories had been artificially altered might share their fictional romantic experiences with friends who would then develop false memories of their own imaginary relationships, creating entire communities of people living in a shared romantic delusion that bore no resemblance to reality. Medieval record keepers documented several instances of memory plague outbreaks, usually in small villages where everyone knew everyone else's business. The entire population would gradually develop elaborate false memories of romantic entanglements that had never occurred, creating a complex web of artificial relationships and imaginary betrayals that could tear communities apart. The only cure was to bring in outsiders who had never been exposed to the infected memories and could help sort out what was real and what was fantasy. As demand for love potions continued to grow, some alchemists began experimenting with what they called compound formulas, potions that combined multiple types of romantic magic into a single elixir. The supreme elixir of all-conquering love promised to create immediate physical attraction, long-term emotional attachment, complete sexual compatibility, absolute faithfulness, and guaranteed fertility, all in one convenient dose. The ingredient list read like a catalog of everything rare and expensive in the medieval world. The formula required materials from every continent known to medieval geography, spices from the Far East that cost more than most people's annual income, precious stones from African mines that had never been seen by European eyes, herbs from the Americas that were so rare they were literally worth their weight in gold. The total cost of ingredients for a single dose could exceed the price of a small castle, making these compound potions accessible only to royalty and the wealthiest nobles. But the real challenge wasn't cost, it was timing. Each ingredient had to be added to the mixture at precisely the right moment, determined by complex astrological calculations that took into account the positions of all known planets, the phase of the moon, and the birthday of both the user and the target. A single miscalculation could ruin months of preparation and thousands of gold coins worth of ingredients. The supreme elixir required a team of specialized alchemists working together, since no single person could master all the different types of magic involved. One expert would handle the attraction components, another would focus on the emotional bonding elements, a third would manage the fidelity aspects, and so on. They had to coordinate their efforts with the precision of a military campaign, each specialist adding their contribution at exactly the right moment while maintaining the proper mental state and speaking the correct incantations. The few recorded attempts to create the supreme elixir were disasters of legendary proportions. One attempt in Paris resulted in an explosion that destroyed an entire city block and left the alchemist's workshop site cursed for decades afterward. A similar project in London ended when the mixture began producing toxic vapors that killed everything within a quarter-mile radius, including the alchemists themselves. The survivors of these experiments reported that the compound formulas were simply too powerful for human beings to control safely. Yet despite these catastrophic failures, the dream of a perfect, all-encompassing love potion continued to obsess medieval alchemists. They developed increasingly elaborate theories about why the compound formulas failed, usually blaming insufficient purity in the ingredients or minor errors in timing, rather than acknowledging that the entire concept might be fundamentally flawed. Each failure only spurred them to attempt even more complex and dangerous combinations. The Guild of Sacred Chemistry, a secret organization of master alchemists that operated across Europe, maintained detailed records of every compound formula attempt. Their archives, hidden in monastery libraries and noble private collections, contained hundreds of failed recipes along with careful analyses of what had gone wrong. These documents read like forensic reports from chemical disasters, documenting explosions, poisonings, and supernatural manifestations that resulted from mixing incompatible magical forces. But the guild members weren't deterred by failure. They viewed each disaster as a learning opportunity, a chance to refine their understanding of how different types of love magic interacted with each other. Their ultimate goal was to create what they called the perfect formula, a love potion so powerful and comprehensive that it would make its user irresistible to any target, regardless of their natural preferences, existing relationships, or personal circumstances. The perfect formula was supposed to work on multiple levels simultaneously. It would create immediate physical attraction by altering the target's perception of the user's appearance. It would generate emotional attachment by triggering the release of natural bonding chemicals in the brain. It would ensure sexual compatibility by adjusting both partners' desires to complement each other perfectly. It would guarantee faithfulness by making the target physically ill when they considered being with anyone else. And it would provide fertility enhancement to ensure that any resulting relationship would produce children, cementing the bond with biological ties. The theoretical ingredient list for the perfect formula was a masterpiece of medieval magical thinking. It included substances that represented every aspect of human love and attraction, from the purely physical to the deeply spiritual. Dragon's blood for passion, unicorn horn for purity, phoenix feathers for renewal, mermaid scales for fluidity, angel's tears for divine blessing, and demon's laughter for earthly pleasure. Each ingredient had to be obtained through specific methods at particular times, often requiring years of preparation and massive financial investment. The guild spent decades trying to locate and acquire these legendary ingredients. They sent expeditions to distant lands, funded explorations of uncharted territories, and maintained networks of merchants and travelers who were always searching for the rare materials needed for their ultimate formula. Some members devoted their entire lives to finding a single ingredient, becoming experts in the mythology and supposed locations of creatures that may never have existed. But as the medieval period drew toward its close, a new challenge emerged that would fundamentally change the world of love potions forever. The printing press began spreading literacy throughout Europe, and with it came a new skepticism about magical claims that couldn't be proven or replicated. The Renaissance brought scientific thinking that demanded evidence rather than faith, experimentation rather than tradition. Yet even as the rational world began to emerge, the human heart remained as mysterious and desperate as ever. Love potions didn't disappear, they simply evolved, adapting to new times while preserving their essential promise that chemistry could conquer the complexities of human emotion. The strange legacy of medieval love magic would continue in forms both subtle and spectacular, carrying forward the eternal human dream that somewhere in the right combination of ingredients lay the secret to making anyone love you back. The alchemists' workshops might have fallen silent, their bizarre recipes might have been forgotten, but the fundamental desire that drove their work, the desperate hope that love could be created rather than simply hoped for, that attraction could be manufactured rather than merely wished for, remained as powerful as ever. In the flickering candlelight of those long ago laboratories, surrounded by the smell of exotic spices and dangerous chemicals, medieval alchemists had discovered something that modern science is only beginning to understand: that love, in all its forms, is indeed a kind of chemistry, strange and wonderful and completely impossible to control. The most terrifying love potions weren't designed to create attraction at all. They were meant to destroy it, to take the deepest romantic connections and twist them into something unrecognizable and horrifying. Medieval alchemists understood that love and hate were separated by the thinnest of margins, and some of their most requested formulas were designed to push relationships across that deadly line. The poison of bitter hearts was commissioned by nobles who wanted to eliminate romantic rivals without resorting to obvious murder. Rather than killing the competition, they would destroy their capacity for love entirely. The target would gradually lose all ability to feel romantic attraction toward anyone, becoming cold, calculating, and emotionally dead. They would push away lovers, reject suitors, and eventually die alone and unloved, never understanding why their heart had turned to stone. The ingredients were chosen specifically for their associations with emotional death and spiritual emptiness. Ashes from wedding dresses that had been worn by brides who died before their wedding night, symbolizing love that had been cut short before it could bloom. Water that had dripped from the eyes of stone statues during winter storms, representing tears that would never warm with genuine emotion. Flowers that had been picked from graves and left to rot in sunlight, embodying beauty that had been corrupted by exposure to death. The preparation required the alchemist to work in a state of deliberate emotional numbness, usually achieved by consuming mild depressants or by meditating on personal losses until all feeling was temporarily extinguished. The theory was that the potion had to be created by someone who understood the absence of love from personal experience, allowing the mixture to carry that emptiness into its victim's heart. But perhaps even more disturbing were the potions designed to create impossible love, attraction so specific and narrow that it could never be satisfied. The elixir of singular obsession would make the target fall desperately in love with one particular person who was guaranteed to be unavailable. A married woman might become obsessed with a priest who had taken vows of celibacy. A peasant man might develop an uncontrollable passion for a noble lady so far above his station that even speaking to her would be considered treason. The psychological torture was exquisite in its precision. The victim would spend every waking moment consumed with desire for someone they could never have, writing letters that could never be sent, composing songs that could never be performed, slowly destroying themselves with longing that had no possible resolution. Meanwhile, the person who had commissioned the potion would watch their target suffer the same kind of hopeless desire they themselves had experienced, creating a perfect circle of romantic revenge. These impossible love potions required ingredients that represented unattainable desires and hopeless quests. Sand from deserts where travelers had died of thirst within sight of mirages, symbolizing desires that seemed real but could never be reached. Feathers from birds that had been shot down while trying to fly too high, representing ambitions that were doomed from the start. Stones from the foundations of towers that had been built so tall they collapsed under their own weight, embodying dreams that were too grand for reality to support. The most sophisticated practitioners could create love potions that were triggered by specific circumstances, lying dormant until the perfect moment to unleash their power. The sleeper's gift was designed to activate only when the target experienced a particular emotional state, usually profound grief or desperate loneliness. The victim would carry the potion's influence for months or even years without any symptoms, living their normal life completely unaware that they had been dosed with love magic. But when tragedy struck, when they lost a parent or spouse or child, when they found themselves isolated and vulnerable, the dormant potion would suddenly bloom into full effect. In their moment of greatest emotional need, they would develop an overwhelming attraction to the person who had secretly drugged them months earlier. It was psychological manipulation of the most calculating kind, using grief and desperation as weapons in the service of romantic conquest. The timing ingredients for these delayed activation potions were among the most expensive and difficult to obtain in the medieval world. Seeds from plants that bloomed only once every 7 years, representing patience and long-term planning. Honey from bees that had survived through multiple harsh winters, symbolizing endurance through difficult times. Wine that had been aged in caves where hermits had spent decades in solitary meditation, embodying the kind of slow, patient waiting that the potion required. Medieval nobles became particularly fond of these delayed potions because they allowed for long-term romantic strategies that could span years or even decades. A young lord might dose a merchant's daughter with a sleeper potion, then wait patiently for the right moment to activate its effects. When her father died and left her financially vulnerable, when her first husband passed away and left her widowed, when any crisis made her emotionally receptive, the dormant love magic would suddenly make her see her secret admirer as the perfect solution to her problems. But the most feared category of love potions were those that worked by transfer, moving romantic feelings from one person to another like a kind of emotional theft. The elixir of stolen affection could take the love that someone felt for their spouse and redirect it toward the potion's creator, leaving the original relationship cold and empty while filling the new one with passionate intensity. The preparation required physical materials from both the original relationship and the intended new one. Hair from the married couple's shared bed, representing the intimacy that would be stolen. Cloth that had absorbed their tears during moments of reconciliation, symbolizing the emotional connection that would be severed. Wine that they had shared during romantic dinners, embodying the joy that would be transferred to someone else. The stealing process was incredibly complex, requiring the alchemist to work with materials from both relationships simultaneously while maintaining perfect balance between them. Too much focus on the original relationship and the theft would fail. Too much attention to the new connection and the stolen feelings would dissipate before they could take hold. The timing had to be precise, the proportions exact, and the mental state of the alchemist perfectly calibrated to channel emotional energy from one target to another. Victims of affection-stealing potions reported experiences that were both heartbreaking and terrifying. They would wake up one morning and realize that their deep love for their spouse had simply vanished, replaced by indifference or even mild disgust. Meanwhile, they would find themselves inexplicably drawn to someone they had barely noticed before, someone who would suddenly seem like the most fascinating and attractive person they had ever met. The original spouse would be left confused and devastated, unable to understand why their partner had suddenly become cold and distant. They would blame themselves, assume they had done something wrong, and often spend years trying desperately to rekindle a love that had been magically stolen rather than naturally lost. The psychological damage to entire families could last for generations. Church authorities were particularly horrified by transfer potions because they seemed to violate the sacred nature of marriage itself. If the bonds between husband and wife could be severed and redirected through chemical means, then the entire foundation of Christian society was under threat. The church began developing its own counter-magic, blessed formulas designed to protect marriages from supernatural interference. Holy water blessed during wedding ceremonies was believed to create a protective barrier around married couples, making them immune to love-stealing magic. Rings that had been worn during the marriage ceremony were sometimes ground into powder and mixed into food to strengthen the emotional bonds between spouses. Even communion wine was occasionally used in protective potions, though this practice was officially condemned by church authorities, who considered it a form of blasphemy. The demand for marriage protection potions became so intense that many alchemists found it more profitable to sell defensive formulas than offensive ones. Rather than helping people steal love, they specialized in helping couples protect the love they already had. These defensive potions often included ingredients associated with permanence and loyalty, iron filings from chains that had never been broken, representing unbreakable bonds, stones from foundations that had supported buildings for hundreds of years, symbolizing lasting stability, water from springs that had flowed continuously since ancient times, embodying constancy and reliability. But the arms race between offensive and defensive love magic led to increasingly dangerous escalations. Alchemists developed potions that could penetrate protective barriers, while their competitors created stronger defenses that required more powerful attacks to overcome. The magical warfare between competing love potions sometimes resulted in innocent victims being caught in the crossfire, experiencing wild swings between artificial attraction and chemical repulsion as different formulas battled for control of their emotions. Medieval court records contain numerous accounts of what authorities called love potion wars, extended conflicts between rival alchemists who used their clients as unwitting soldiers in battles for magical supremacy. A merchant might commission a love potion to win a noble lady's affections, only to discover that she was already under the influence of a rival's formula. The competing potions would create increasingly bizarre effects as they interacted with each other, sometimes resulting in the target falling in love with completely random individuals who had nothing to do with either original scheme. The most documented love potion war took place in Venice during the late 14th century, involving three master alchemists who had all been commissioned to help different suitors win the same wealthy widow. The widow of San Marco became the unwitting battleground for increasingly sophisticated magical attacks and counterattacks that lasted for nearly 2 years. She would fall passionately in love with one suitor, then suddenly transfer her affections to another, then develop an inexplicable attraction to a third, all while remaining completely unaware that her emotions were being manipulated by competing chemicals. The situation became so chaotic that the widow eventually fled Venice entirely, taking refuge in a convent where she hoped the sacred environment would protect her from further magical interference. But even there, she continued to experience random romantic obsessions with priests, visiting pilgrims, and even other nuns, as the residual effects of multiple love potions continued to interact in unpredictable ways. The Venice incident led to the first attempts at regulating the love potion industry. The city council passed laws requiring alchemists to register their formulas with municipal authorities and to pay compensation to victims who could prove they had been damaged by magical interference. But enforcement was nearly impossible, since the effects of love potions were indistinguishable from natural romantic attraction, and victims were often too embarrassed to admit they might have been under magical influence. Some alchemists began specializing in what they called diagnostic potions, formulas designed to detect whether someone was already under the influence of love magic. These detection elixirs would supposedly reveal artificial attractions by causing specific physical reactions in people who had been dosed with romantic chemicals. Excessive sweating might indicate the presence of passion-inducing compounds. Sudden nausea could suggest loyalty-binding formulas. Temporary blindness was associated with obsession-creating mixtures. But diagnostic potions created their own problems, since they often produced the very symptoms they were supposed to detect, making it impossible to distinguish between genuine magical influence and the effects of the detection process itself. Medieval medicine was not sophisticated enough to understand the difference between chemical reactions and psychosomatic responses. So diagnostic sessions often became elaborate theatrical performances where everyone involved convinced themselves they were witnessing magical phenomena. The most skilled alchemists eventually developed what they called universal neutralizers, potions designed to counteract any type of love magic, regardless of its original formula or ingredients. These were incredibly expensive and dangerous to produce, requiring rare materials that had never been exposed to any form of romantic influence. Virgin metals that had been mined by celibate monks, water from springs that had never reflected the image of lovers, stones from mountains where no human had ever felt desire. The preparation of universal neutralizers required the alchemist to work in a state of complete emotional isolation, often achieved by consuming substances that temporarily suppressed all feeling. They had to maintain this numbness throughout the entire brewing process, never allowing any personal emotion to contaminate the mixture. The slightest hint of attraction, affection, or even mild fondness could ruin the entire formula. But universal neutralizers came with a terrible cost. They didn't just remove artificial romantic influences, they often destroyed the victim's capacity for natural love as well. People who had been treated with neutralizing potions frequently reported a permanent inability to form emotional connections with anyone. They could function normally in society, maintain friendships and professional relationships, but they never again experienced the deep, passionate love that makes life meaningful. Medieval physicians documented hundreds of cases of what they called neutralizer syndrome, a condition where former love potion victims became emotionally dead after treatment. These individuals would often beg to be redosed with the original love magic, preferring artificial passion to authentic emptiness. But once neutralized, their hearts seemed permanently closed to all romantic possibility. The psychological impact on families was devastating. Children would watch their parents become cold strangers after neutralizer treatment, unable to understand why mother and father no longer showed affection toward each other or anyone else. Spouses would find themselves married to people who remembered loving them, but could no longer actually feel those emotions. The cure for magical love often proved worse than the original artificial disease. As the medieval period reached its final centuries, love potion technology had become so sophisticated and dangerous that it threatened to destabilize the entire social order. Marriages were being dissolved by chemical warfare. Noble bloodlines were being manipulated by romantic mercenaries, and entire communities were living under the influence of competing magical formulas. The human heart had become a battlefield where alchemists fought proxy wars using other people's emotions as weapons. Yet despite all the danger, all the documented disasters, all the warnings from church and state authorities, the demand for love potions continued to grow, because at its core, the promise remained as compelling as ever, that somewhere in the right combination of rare ingredients and arcane knowledge lay the secret to being loved, to being desired, to never again facing the terrible possibility of romantic rejection. The medieval alchemists had created more than just chemical formulas. They had built an entire industry based on humanity's deepest insecurities and most desperate hopes, and as we'll discover, Their bizarre legacy would survive the collapse of the medieval world, adapting and evolving through centuries of change, always promising that love was just one potion away. In the final decades before the Renaissance swept away the old certainties, a new type of love potion emerged that was perhaps the strangest of all. These were formulas designed not to create love, but to reveal it, to strip away all the social conventions and personal defenses that kept people from expressing their true romantic feelings. The truth serum of hearts promised to show what lay hidden beneath layers of propriety and fear. The formula for these truth-revealing elixirs was deceptively simple, yet required ingredients that were nearly impossible to obtain honestly. Mirrors that had reflected only truthful faces, supposedly gathered from the chambers of saints and hermits who had never told a lie. Wine that had been aged in cellars where confessions were heard, absorbing decades of whispered secrets and hidden desires. And most precious of all, tears shed in absolute solitude, when no other human witness existed to judge or condemn the weeper's authentic emotions. The preparation required the alchemist to work in a state of brutal self-honesty, often achieved by consuming mild doses of their own truth-revealing compounds until they could no longer maintain any personal deceptions. They would spend hours before each brewing session examining their own romantic failures and secret desires, stripping away every layer of self-protection until they reached a core of raw, unfiltered emotion that could be channeled into the potion. The effects were reportedly devastating in their honesty. A shy merchant who had secretly loved his neighbor's wife for years might suddenly find himself unable to maintain polite conversation without confessing his passion. A noble lady who had married for status rather than affection might discover herself telling her husband exactly what she thought of their loveless arrangement. Young men who had joined monasteries to escape romantic complications would find themselves admitting their true reasons to horrified abbots who had assumed they were dealing with genuine religious vocations. But the most disturbing aspect of truth-revealing potions was how they exposed the artificial nature of so many medieval relationships. Marriages that appeared stable and loving were revealed as elaborate performances maintained by social pressure and economic necessity. Passionate courtships that seemed genuine turned out to be carefully calculated campaigns for financial advancement. Even relationships that both partners believed were authentic sometimes crumbled when the participants were forced to acknowledge their real motivations. Medieval society was built on layers of polite fiction and necessary deception, and truth potions threatened to tear away the entire social fabric. Church authorities were particularly terrified because these elixirs revealed how many supposedly pious individuals were driven by lust, greed, and ambition rather than genuine spiritual devotion. Monastery records document several instances where truth-revealing compounds were accidentally introduced into communal meals, resulting in mass confessions that exposed decades of hidden sin and hypocrisy. The Guild of Sacred Chemistry eventually banned the production of truth-revealing formulas entirely, not because they didn't work, but because they worked too well. The master alchemists realized that their society couldn't function if everyone was forced to acknowledge their authentic feelings about love, marriage, and desire. Some truths were simply too dangerous to be spoken aloud, yet black market production continued, driven by individuals who were desperate to understand what their lovers really felt about them. Jealous spouses would slip truth serums into their partner's wine, hoping to finally learn whether their suspicions about infidelity were justified. Rejected suitors would attempt to dose their beloved with honesty elixirs, believing that forced authenticity would reveal hidden attraction. Young people trapped in arranged marriages would seek out truth potions to discover whether genuine affection might eventually develop between them and their designated spouse. The results were almost universally catastrophic. Medieval people had developed elaborate social rituals and polite deceptions precisely because unfiltered honesty was too destructive for ordinary relationships to survive. When those protective barriers were chemically dissolved, the resulting emotional carnage could tear apart entire communities. One particularly well-documented incident occurred in a small French village where the local baker accidentally used truth-revealing flour in his weekly bread delivery. Within hours, the entire population was confessing their real feelings about neighbors, relatives, and romantic partners. Marriages dissolved, friendships ended, business partnerships collapsed, and several people had to flee the village entirely to escape the social consequences of their chemically induced honesty. The incident became known as the Day of Terrible Truths, and it convinced many authorities that truth-revealing potions were more dangerous than any other form of love magic. At least conventional love potions created artificial emotions that might eventually fade or be countered with antidotes. But truth serums revealed authentic feelings that couldn't be unsaid or forgotten, permanently damaging relationships that might have survived if certain realities had remained unspoken. As winter deepened and the medieval world prepared for the changes that would sweep it away with the coming Renaissance, alchemists began developing their most ambitious formulas yet. These were potions designed not just to influence individual relationships, but to reshape the entire nature of human romantic experience. The great work of universal love was intended to create a world where everyone loved everyone else equally, eliminating jealousy, rejection, and romantic suffering entirely. The theoretical foundation was elegantly simple. If love was indeed a chemical reaction that could be triggered and controlled through the right combination of substances, then it should be possible to create a formula that would make every human being equally attractive to every other human being. Physical appearance, social status, personal compatibility, none of these factors would matter anymore, because everyone would experience the same overwhelming attraction to everyone else. The Guild of Sacred Chemistry devoted enormous resources to this ultimate project, commissioning expeditions to every corner of the known world in search of ingredients that had never been tainted by selective attraction. They needed materials that had existed before the concept of romantic preference had entered the world. Substances from the Garden of Eden itself, where Adam and Eve had known only pure, universal love before the fall introduced discrimination and desire. The ingredient list read like a catalog of impossibilities. Water from the original rivers of paradise, supposedly preserved in underground springs that had never been touched by human sin. Flowers that had bloomed in the presence of perfect love, allegedly growing in hidden valleys where saints had achieved complete spiritual union with the divine. and most challenging of all, the essence of prelapsarian desire, the pure form of attraction that had existed before humans learned to distinguish between different objects of love. Master alchemists spent decades trying to recreate these primordial substances using earthly materials. They developed elaborate purification rituals designed to strip away thousands of years of accumulated romantic corruption from ordinary ingredients. Holy water was distilled through processes that lasted months, removing every trace of particular human desire. Precious metals were refined in fires that burned continuously for years, eliminating all associations with individual preference or selective attraction. But the great work faced a fundamental philosophical problem that its creators never fully acknowledged. If everyone loved everyone else equally, then love itself would become meaningless. The very concept of romantic attraction depended on choice, on the ability to prefer one person over others. A world where such preferences had been chemically eliminated wouldn't be a paradise of universal love, but rather a sterile landscape where the word love had lost all significance. Some younger members of the guild began to question whether the great work was even desirable, let alone achievable. They argued that the pain and uncertainty of selective love were necessary components of the human experience, that removing the possibility of rejection also eliminated the meaning of acceptance. A love that was chemically guaranteed couldn't provide the same satisfaction as affection that had been freely chosen. These philosophical debates split the Guild of Sacred Chemistry into competing factions. The Universalists continued working toward their goal of chemically induced equal love for all, while the Particularists argued that selective attraction was an essential feature of human nature that shouldn't be tampered with. The conflict became so intense that rival groups began sabotaging each other's experiments and stealing ingredients from competing laboratories. The factional warfare ultimately destroyed the guild entirely. By the early 15th century, the last of the great medieval alchemical laboratories had been abandoned, their master practitioners dead or scattered, their accumulated knowledge lost or hidden away in secret libraries where it would remain buried for centuries. But the dream of chemical love didn't die with the guild. It simply transformed, adapting to new times and new understanding of human chemistry. The strange formulas and bizarre ingredients of medieval love potions would evolve into the perfumes and cosmetics of the Renaissance, the patent medicines of the Enlightenment, and eventually the pharmaceuticals of the modern age. Each generation would rediscover the same fundamental truth that had driven medieval alchemists to spend their lives mixing impossible ingredients in pursuit of romantic certainty. The human heart remained as mysterious and uncontrollable as ever, and the promise that chemistry might someday solve the puzzle of love continued to tantalize desperate romantics across the centuries as candlelight flickered in those long abandoned workshops, as the last traces of exotic ingredients crumbled to dust on forgotten shelves. The legacy of medieval love potions lived on in a single eternal truth. Love might indeed be a form of chemistry, but it was a chemistry so complex, so deeply intertwined with consciousness and choice and meaning, that no earthly formula could hope to capture its essence. The medieval alchemists had failed in their quest to manufacture love, but they had succeeded in something far more valuable. They had documented humanity's endless capacity for hope, for believing that somewhere in the right combination of rare ingredients and desperate effort lay the answer to loneliness and rejection and the terrible vulnerability of the human heart. Their bizarre recipes would be forgotten, their dangerous formulas lost to time, but their fundamental insight would endure. Love was indeed worth any price, any risk, any amount of suffering and ridicule and failure, and perhaps that desperate willingness to try anything, to believe in any possibility, to mix any combination of ingredients, no matter how strange or dangerous, was itself the most powerful love potion of all. The winter nights were growing longer, and in the gathering darkness, the echo of ancient hopes continued to whisper through the corridors of time, carrying with them the scent of roses and mercury, the taste of crushed pearls and ground unicorn horn, and the eternal promise that love, somehow, some way, could be made to bloom even in the most barren and impossible soil. In the final chapter of our journey through medieval love's chemical chaos, we find perhaps the most haunting truth of all. These weren't just desperate romantics playing with dangerous toys. They were the ancestors of every person who has ever stood in a perfume shop, hoping that the right scent might catch someone's attention. Every individual who has ever wondered if there's a supplement, a pheromone spray, a dating app algorithm that might finally solve the riddle of attraction. The medieval alchemists understood something we've forgotten in our age of dating profiles and chemical romance. They knew that love was terrifying precisely because it couldn't be controlled, couldn't be guaranteed, couldn't be purchased no matter how much gold you threw at the problem. And yet they tried anyway, because the alternative, accepting that romantic success was largely a matter of chance and timing and mysterious compatibility, was simply too frightening to contemplate. Their workshops may have reeked of sulfur and desperation. Their formulas may have been more likely to cause food poisoning than passionate romance, but at least they were doing something. They were taking action against the most powerless feeling in human experience, that moment when you realize your heart belongs entirely to someone who barely knows you exist. Modern science has vindicated some of their intuitions, though not in ways they would have recognized. We now know that attraction really is partially chemical, that pheromones and neurotransmitters and hormonal cycles all play roles in romantic compatibility. We understand that what medieval people called love potions were often crude attempts to manipulate the same biological systems that dating websites now try to hack with algorithms and compatibility questionnaires. But we've also learned what the alchemists never quite grasped, that the chemistry of love is so intimately connected with consciousness, memory, personality, and individual history that no external formula can reliably reproduce it. The spark between two people emerges from the intersection of 1,000 variables, most of which we don't fully understand even today. The strangest part of this medieval story isn't the bizarre ingredients or the dangerous side effects or even the astronomical prices people paid for liquid hope. It's how recognizable the emotions remain across 7 centuries of change. The merchant staring hopelessly at the baker's daughter, the noble lady trapped in a loveless political marriage, the young monk wrestling with desires his vows forbade him to acknowledge. They were feeling exactly the same things that drive people to swipe endlessly through dating apps at 3 in the morning. Medieval people had unicorn horn and mercury. We have pheromone perfumes and confidence-boosting supplements and pick-up artist courses that promise to decode the secret psychology of attraction. The ingredients have changed, but the underlying desperation remains identical. We're all still looking for that magic formula that will make someone love us back. Perhaps that's the real legacy of medieval love potions, not the specific recipes or the particular ingredients, but the stubborn refusal to accept that matters of the heart might be beyond human control. The alchemists who spent fortunes on crushed pearls and phoenix feathers were expressing the same defiant hope that drives every modern romantic gesture, every carefully crafted text message, every strategic social media post designed to catch someone's attention. They believed, with touching and dangerous naivety, that love was a problem that could be solved rather than a mystery that could only be experienced. They thought romance was a chemical equation rather than a form of magic that happened between minds and souls in ways that no laboratory could replicate. And maybe, in their beautiful foolishness, they were onto something important. Maybe the willingness to try anything, to believe in any possibility, to risk embarrassment and bankruptcy and poisoning in pursuit of connection. Maybe that desperate openness itself is what makes love possible, not the potions themselves, but the vulnerability required to seek them out, to admit that you need help, that your heart isn't strong enough to face rejection without some kind of chemical armor. The medieval alchemists failed spectacularly at manufacturing love, but they succeeded brilliantly at documenting the human capacity for hope in the face of impossible odds. Their workshops were temples to the belief that somewhere, somehow, there had to be an answer to loneliness. Their bizarre formulas were prayers written in the language of chemistry, desperate appeals to forces beyond their understanding. As winter settles more deeply around us and the night grows quieter, we can almost hear them still, those long-dead romantics grinding their impossible ingredients and whispering their arcane formulas into the darkness. They're mixing rose petals with moonlight, combining crushed emeralds with virgin's tears, adding one final pinch of powdered hope to elixirs that will never work the way they're supposed to. But perhaps that's not the point. Perhaps the real magic was never in the potions themselves, but in the courage required to keep believing that love was possible, that connection could be achieved, that somewhere in the vast chemical complexity of human emotion lay combinations that could bridge the terrible gap between one heart and another. The alchemist laboratories are empty now, their furnaces cold, their ingredient lists scattered like ancient prayers across the pages of forgotten books. But their essential discovery endures in every person who has ever taken a deep breath, straightened their shoulders, and decided to try once more to make someone notice them, to care about them, to maybe, possibly, impossibly love them back. In the end, that might be the most powerful love potion of all. Not mercury and crushed unicorn horn, not phoenix feathers and dragon's blood, but simply the inexhaustible human willingness to keep hoping, keep trying, keep believing that this time somehow the magic might finally work. And so our journey through the shadowy world of medieval love potions draws to its close. But like the lingering effects of those ancient elixirs, some questions refuse to fade. What became of all those desperate souls who drank liquid starlight and powdered dreams? What happened to the merchants who bankrupted themselves for a taste of manufactured passion, or the nobles who risked everything for a vial of chemical certainty. The historical record falls silent on most individual stories, but occasionally, in the margins of monastery chronicles or the private letters of long-dead families, we catch glimpses of lives forever altered by these bizarre experiments in romantic chemistry. A French nobleman who claimed his wife had been enchanted, spending his final years trying to break a spell that may never have existed. An Italian merchant's daughter who insisted she could taste magic in her wine, developing such paranoia about love potions that she refused all food not prepared by her own hands. Perhaps most haunting are the accounts of those who found exactly what they were looking for, only to discover it wasn't what they wanted at all. A Venetian widow whose diary describes the horror of realizing her passionate second marriage had been chemically induced, leaving her unable to distinguish between authentic emotion and artificial attraction. A young monk who broke his vows for a love he later suspected had been magically implanted, spending decades wondering whether his greatest joy had been genuine or merely the product of someone else's desperate scheming. These stories remind us that the medieval obsession with love potions wasn't really about chemistry at all. It was about control, about the terrifying vulnerability that comes with wanting someone who might not want you back. The alchemists promise to solve the fundamental inequality of attraction, to level the playing field between the beautiful and the plain, the charming and the awkward, the powerful and the powerless. But in their quest to manufacture desire, they may have discovered something more disturbing than any of their exotic formulas. They learned that love without uncertainty loses much of its meaning, that passion without the possibility of rejection becomes as hollow as their empty vials. The very thing that made love so precious, its unpredictability, its refusal to follow rules or respond to bribes, was exactly what their potions sought to eliminate. As the candles burn lower and the night deepens around us, we're left with a final, unsettling thought. In our modern world of dating algorithms and compatibility scores, of pheromone perfumes and confidence coaches, are we really so different from those medieval alchemists? We've simply replaced their crushed pearls with data points, their unicorn horn with user profiles, their mystical timing with optimized message delivery. The tools have evolved, but the desperate hope remains the same. Somewhere, somehow, there must be a formula for love, a method for transforming longing into belonging, a way to guarantee that our affections will be returned rather than left to wither in the cold silence of indifference. The medieval alchemists never found their perfect love potion, and perhaps that's the most important lesson of all. Love remains what it has always been, not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived, not a chemical reaction to be controlled, but a form of magic that happens between souls in ways that no laboratory, medieval or modern, will ever fully understand. And maybe, in the quiet darkness of this winter night, that's exactly as it should be. The mystery is the magic, the uncertainty is the excitement, and the risk of heartbreak is the price we pay for the possibility of finding something real, something genuine, something that no potion could ever create or destroy. Sweet dreams, and may your own romantic chemistry be wonderfully, beautifully, impossibly beyond the reach of any artificial enhancement. The medieval alchemists would have envied you that uncertainty, that delicious, terrifying not knowing that makes every glance, every touch, every whispered word a small miracle of authentic human connection.